How does an immortal being deal with death? Welcome to the Immortal Gifts Podcast, where Dave Robison, Veronica Giguerre, and J Daniel Sawyer read my novel, Immortal Gifts, to you. I'm Catherine Filliard, and I wrote this. This episode of the Immortal Gifts Podcast is sponsored by me. If you like the podcast, tell your friends. If you've run out of friends to tell, buy the book. It's available in ebook, paperback, hardcover, large print, and audio. I also have a Patreon and a Ko-fi, if that's your thing. Impatient? The audiobook is available at my shop and my Patreon and will be headed to all the places audiobooks are sold. And with that, on to the show.
A New Life. Abraham, New York, New York, June 6th, 1939. New York City looked more like the movies than I'd ever dreamed possible. Our boat pulled into the harbor in the dark, and yet it was all tall buildings and glittering lights. Even the children, depressed as they were, appeared awed. We rushed to the front of the line, hoping we could get indoors before sunrise. The air was all the scent of brine and exhaust fumes. There was some awkwardness at Ellis Island, where the desk clerk issued Shlomo's paperwork under the English version of his name, Solomon. I suppose the papers didn't list the name I was born with either, but I felt bad for little Shlomo. At least they got Ruth's first name right. We registered under the name Horowitz. I noticed they hadn't renamed Ludwig's alias. He was, however, questioned as to his views on Hitler. "It's difficult to answer that question without using language unbecoming to a gentleman," he said, turning up his aristocratic nose. They also gave us literacy tests. I channeled Bettina Weber and rolled my eyes extensively while reading their samples as quickly as possible. When they asked about the Stradivarius, I handed Isaac to little Ruth and played Paganini for the immigration officer. This caused a visible change in his attitude, and they allowed us into the United States. That unpleasantness over, we went looking for food for the children and purchased a newspaper so that we could find an apartment. Abraham, New York, New York, July 1st, 1939 through July 1st, 1943. We settled into an apartment in Upper Manhattan. I enrolled the children in public school and Hebrew school on the weekends. It was cheerful and bright, with the sounds and smells of passing cars at all hours. Isaac spent his days sunning on a windowsill, and would come when I called so I could stroke his soft, sun-warmed fur. I tried to go say Kaddish for Miriam and Shana, at a small group that met in living rooms rather than a full synagogue, but I had missed the entire month. I told God repeatedly in the presence of less than 10 Jews that it was my sincere wish to say Kaddish for my loved ones, but not enough people had arrived for me to do it. One can only say Kaddish in the presence of 10 other Jews. My first attempts to cook for Ruth and Solomon, well, I didn't poison them, so I considered it a minor victory. The children were unimpressed with my skills, but that was fair. We ate at restaurants a lot until I improved. I didn't make them call me Abba or Tati because they already had a father. He was dead, but he had existed. But as far as I was concerned, I was their parent now. Ludwig helped in an allowance-giving, homework-assisting, paternal style. We were Uncle Avraham and Uncle Ludwig to them. My investments were at an unusually low point because some assets had been seized by the Nazis, but still livable. Ludwig's were doing well, so neither of us had to work, although I did the odd violin concert under an assumed name. Ludwig paid a doctor to have us declared exempt from the draft because of ill health, which was just as well because obviously we couldn't march outdoors. We bought war bonds to make up for it. We also leaned into our old British accents and did our best to avoid speaking in German because of anti-German sentiment, at least in public. Ludwig and I did the masquerade for the children, much like Flora and I had done for John and Eliza, which was stupid because they'd witnessed my attack on the Nazis who killed their mother. We pretended to eat, or told them we'd eaten while they were at school, and fed any table scraps to Isaac. When they were home and awake, we flushed toilets randomly. We went to bed and stayed up all night reading. Ludwig took the largest bedroom with a view of the Chrysler Building, of course, but I took one with a lovely view, and the children shared. They seemed to prefer that. Little Solomon was wildly addicted to the Lone Ranger on the radio, and would sometimes shout, "Hi-ho, Silver, away!" right before bed. We also took the children to stage plays, concerts, and movies. We helped them with their homework. They were exemplary students, but they had to be. Many American universities, including Harvard, Yale, and Columbia, had rigid quotas on how many Jewish students they admitted. One dean of Yale instructed his admissions department, "Never admit more than 5 Jews and take no blacks at all." If the children noticed that Uncle Avraham and Uncle Ludwig weren't aging, they said nothing, nor did they even discuss what happened the day their mother died. I wasn't certain they remembered, to be honest. Surely they did, but they never spoke of it, gave no sign of it. Perhaps trauma had erased their memories.
Ludwig, New York, New York, July 1st, 1939 to July 1st, 1943. I had remarkably little experience with children. I'd never intended to have any, and even when I was a child myself, I spent little time with children who weren't my brother Friedrich. Abraham had parented before, and I did my best to follow his lead. Not that I cooked, mind you. His attempts went from smelling dismal to smelling quite appealing, but of course, neither of us could eat it. We always had an excuse for the children, however. I wasn't sure why, since I was fairly certain they knew, but again, I followed Abraham's lead. Alas, Friedrich, dead these many long years. It dismayed me to realize that I seldom thought of him these days. But I had been a spare. Friedrich was the heir, and they had shipped me off to the church as soon as Friedrich had reached his majority. On the rare days that I thought of him, I missed him terribly. It was oddly satisfying to help Solomon and Ruth grow and succeed. All right, Abraham's disapproving expression when I bribed the children to clean their bedroom was less satisfying. Oh, the scolding I received. Bad for their characters, etc. Next time, I'd wait till Abraham was out. It saddened me not to share a room with Abraham. It wasn't like we slept, after all. I merely wanted to have a conversation partner for those hours. But for propriety's sake, and appearances, and to further the illusion of ordinary mortal humanity for the children, well, one wouldn't want to give the wrong impression about our relationship. There might have been consequences. We hadn't shared a room except on the boat across the Atlantic, so perhaps he was pleased to have his own space again. I was further saddened that times had changed so as to savagely curtail perfectly innocent physical affection between men. Men used to hug and hold hands and the like and never be thought less manly, let alone be accused of indecent behavior. But now it was as fraught as the interactions with women had been in my youth. Ironically, they were fraught for the same reason. Sex. Sex and fear of people thinking that you might have it inappropriately. I would never understand the obsession with sex, and I sorely missed the hugs and hand-holding. But, in deference to the times, I never held Abraham's hand in front of the children, however much I might have wished to do so.
Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, March 3rd, 2021. I was reading in my study, a biography of Leonard Bernstein if you're interested, when Destiny came in. It was late, 2 a.m. or so. I tilted my head at her. The baby's head dropped, my water broke, and my contractions are about 3.5 minutes apart. My brain refused to process this information. I stared at her. "I'm in labor," she said, sounding mildly exasperated. I leaped out of my chair so quickly that I startled her, rushed around the room at vampiric speed, gathering up the things she had packed for the hospital and my sun gear, then asked her, "Do you want me to carry you to the car?" She clutched her stomach. "Let me try." I rushed to the door and opened it for her. She waddled down the stairs, and we piled into the car and drove to the hospital. The trees were still bare, but the snow was gone. I dropped her off at the door and parked the car and ran to meet her in the ER, quickly enough that I didn't show up on any cameras. As I saw it, my job was to wait on Destiny while she did all the hard work. I held her hand, I mopped her brow, I supported all her pain medication decisions. She squeezed my hand and moaned, and I kissed her cheek and told her she was doing a great job. It irresistibly reminded me of death, which might sound odd. There was something momentous in the air, a sense that the number of souls in the world was changing. I thought of my father, of Flora and the children, of Victoria. Also, I realized Destiny might die, although maternal mortality rates were much better than they had been in my youth. The realization still caused ice in the pit of my stomach. Destiny was fine. I'm not sure what I would have done if she hadn't been. The nurse took her readings at one point and said, "Uh-oh," and I had a moment of wondering if I was going to create a new vampire right then, but it all came to nothing. Either way, I knew that my life was changing forever. When our daughter finally emerged, it was shocking and bloody. I'd never been present for such a thing before. Okay, I'd been there when my sweet Devora had her kittens. She insisted. But it was so much easier for cats that I found myself unprepared. Or perhaps it's partly that cats are incredibly stoic and liars about whether they're in pain. I hid my discomfort and anxiety and told Destiny that she was amazing. The smell of iron was overwhelming and was making me salivate and my fangs protrude, so I clapped my hand over my mouth and caught her eye. She smiled and nodded, and I rushed out to the men's room to control myself. I returned calmer, with the nurse trying not to smile at me. I suppose she thought I'd vomited at the sight of blood and found that somehow cute. And then we had a crying baby girl. They cleaned her off and handed her to Destiny, who was glowing. I wondered what she was. Was she human? A vampire? Something new? I'd known her for less than 5 minutes. How did I already love her with all my heart? I said the blessing for firsts again. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, Chechehiyanu, Vikiyamanu, Vihigianu, Lazman Azah. Blessed are you, Adonai our God, sovereign of all, who has kept us alive, sustained us, and brought us to this time. "What do you want to name her?" the nurse asked. Destiny gazed at me and I suggested, "Miriam Eliza?" While we traditionally don't name babies after someone who died young, and tragically, there's an exception for martyrs. Destiny smiled and nodded. She kissed Miriam on the forehead and said, "Oh yeah, I could do that again." The nurse laughed and said, "You were a champ."
Destiny, Red Bank, New Jersey, March 4th, 2021. We had a private hospital room to share with Miriam, which was lovely. I held Miriam, who was perfect, and Abraham sat on the bed next to us.
"How are you feeling?"
he asked. It was the happiest day of my life, or at least tied with my wedding, but my hoo-ha hurts. I burst out laughing at his mortified expression. "I'm happy, but yeah, that hurt like a—" I trailed off and glanced down at little Miriam. Did I need to censor my language for a newborn? Like a matron fornicator. Abraham gently laid a hand over Miriam's ear and murmured,
Innocent ears.
but he was grinning. I laughed.
Seriously, can I help?
I considered this. I'd really like a cup of tea and maybe some chocolate. He hopped up.
Easily done.
He kissed my forehead and walked out. Behind the blinds, I could tell the sun was rising. The nurse came in.
Good morning, Mrs. Levy.
Before I could say anything, she opened the blinds, leaving Miriam and me in full sunlight. I stared down at Miriam in a panic, but she didn't react to the sun at all. Not a vampire, then. I mean, Ludwig had said she wouldn't be, but what if he'd been wrong? I glanced up at the nurse, who was staring at me.
My husband has a sun sensitivity, and I didn't know if our daughter inherited it or not. Please close the blinds again for her father.
The nurse asked,
Sun sensitivity?
but she closed the blinds.
Like porphyria, I said.
I'm not a good liar, but that was enough that the nurse's eyes widened, and she stared down at Miriam in alarm. Abraham came in with a paper cup full of tea and a candy bar. He'd found lint. The nurse eyed Abraham, but all she said was,
I was actually here for your daughter, for tests.
I surrendered my daughter, and Abraham helped me sit up, and drink tea. I only ate a few squares of chocolate, but I drank all the tea. Then I said,
I think I'll lie back down, if you don't mind.
I didn't want to sit any more than I needed to. Parts of my body were well aware that they had recently passed a baby. He helped me settle back in. He was stronger than he appeared, but I supposed that was to be expected with his condition. The nurse bustled back in.
Here's your little girl. We didn't close the blinds, and she didn't react, so she's fine. What condition does your husband have again? Did you say porphyria?
Abraham's eyes went wide, and his jaw dropped. He took Miriam out of the nurse's arms and turned his back on her.
Thank you, I said. Please keep the blinds closed. We didn't hurt your baby, sir,
the nurse said. That was when my mother's arrived.
Let me see that baby,
Morgan insisted, and Abraham handed her over. Morgan held the baby and bounced a little.
Aren't you precious? Yes, you are.
Bridget leaned in and kissed Miriam on the forehead. The nurse returned with my lunch, which wasn't vegetarian, so I made her take it back.
Abraham, Red Bank, New Jersey, March 4th, 2021 through March 6th, 2021. Our expensive private room wasn't particularly private. People were coming in and out at all hours of the day and night to take Destiny's blood pressure, check the baby, etc. And even though we'd said that we wanted to room in with little Miriam, they kept whisking her away for tests and exams. I held her and cuddled her while Destiny slept and was keen to go home, not least because the staff kept coming in and trying to open the blinds. All that said, Miriam was worth the inconvenience and the effort we'd gone to get her. She was perfect. She cried and slept a lot, but I think she recognized us and would cry when the staff came and took her away. I had never imagined I could love anyone as much as I loved Miriam. When we could finally go home, well, those couple of weeks were a blur. Thank goodness we had no bottle baby kittens. At first, Destiny lay in bed and I brought her meals on a tray and brought her little Miriam whenever she cried. Then Destiny started moving around more. She intended to go back to work once her maternity leave was over, so I was going to take primary responsibility for baby care once that happened. I read up on the topic. Not needing sleep was an advantage in infant care. I could let Destiny sleep while I fed and diapered little Miriam. I put Miriam in her crib after a feeding, and Ivan came over and hopped into the crib. He sniffed her all over and then gazed up at me. "Yes, she's a baby," I said. Ivan tilted his head at me. I again had the sense that Ivan understood English now. "What?" Ivan lay down next to Miriam and wrapped a furry arm around her. He purred. Maybe he was warm. He became warmer after he fed, just like me. Freddie trotted into the room and lay down in front of the crib as if he were guarding it. Miriam seemed perfectly satisfied with breast milk, by the way. I wasn't surprised. Despite what I had been told about vampires being infertile being untrue, we just needed a great deal of modern technology to make it happen. Ludwig continued to insist that vampires were only created one way.
Destiny. Rumson, New Jersey, April 28th, 2021. The short, pale woman wearing an elaborate headscarf ushered me and Miriam back to the changing room and introduced herself as Elisheva, the mikveh lady. She led us into a luxurious changing area with a shower tub combo and brown, cream, and stone tiles. Fluffy white towels sat waiting on a granite counter.
No necklace, no wedding ring, no scents. Nothing you weren't born with, Elisheva said in a practiced tone.
It was probably her regular spiel. No masks either. They'd asked for our vaccination status instead.
It's Miriam who's converting, not me.
I smiled at her, even though I felt a slight twinge of guilt at feeling like I was being disloyal to my faith. But we don't care if you're Wiccan and something else, so Miriam could decide for herself when she got older. According to the internet, this was even a thing. Jewish.
Oh,
Elisheva bit her lip.
Well, do shower to keep things clean in the mikveh, including between your toes and under your fingernails. You can wear your bathing suit, but Miriam can't wear anything she wasn't born in. Including her diaper, I presume.
Elisheva nodded.
And take her into the tub with you so you can wash between her fingers and toes. Do you want me to hold her while you change?
I nodded and handed Miriam to Elisheva, who smiled and spoke gently to Miriam. I ducked behind a door and changed into my bathing suit. When I came out, Elisheva had her back turned, which was nice.
All done.
Elisheva handed me the baby and said,
I'll be outside. Knock when you're ready.
I climbed into the bath with Miriam and examined her fingers and toes for dirt. When I was convinced that Miriam was as clean as a baby could be, I climbed back out, wrapped Miriam in a fluffy towel, and knocked.
Ready?
Elisheva asked through the door.
Yes,
I said, and opened it. Elisheva smiled at me and led me out through another door into a room with a deep pool of water, where Abraham and Rabbi Kaplan and Dave the accountant waited. Abraham was so beautiful. Huge brown eyes, long brown hair, delicate features. For a moment I stopped and stared at him. Elisheva nodded at me, and I handed her Miriam's towel and descended the steps into the warm, soft water. It wasn't my particular tradition, but it still felt deeply holy to me. Hey, I'm eclectic. I don't think my tradition has a monopoly on holiness. My initiation included a bath in my mother's massive tub with rose petals and incense, so the same, but different, I supposed.
Abraham, Rumson, New Jersey, April 28th, 2021. Destiny and I brought little Miriam into the community mikveh together for her conversion ceremony, and Destiny went to shower and bathe little Miriam. I sat with Dave and Rabbi Kaplan from Temple Emmanuel and fidgeted in the waiting area. He was a pale man with thick red hair and horn-rimmed glasses wearing a kippah. He would oversee Miriam's conversion today. Next to me, my accountant Dave fidgeted. On the other side of Dave, Destiny's friend and vet tech Lucy looked around curiously. "Do I need to do anything special to be respectful?" Lucy asked. Rabbi Kaplan smiled at her. "You're fine, but thank you for asking. If it was Destiny converting, the men would be outside and you would turn your back when she dropped the towel. But that's not necessary for a baby." Lucy tilted her head. Rabbi Kaplan turned to me. "You know your baby would be Jewish in our congregation without conversion," Rabbi Kaplan said. Yes, I'd gone reform after Rabbi Kaplan informed me services were Friday nights and assured me Sunday mornings were a high reform thing. He also promised a lack of organ music, saying they tended more towards acoustic guitar, which is still a no if one is Orthodox, by the way, but it wasn't an organ. I'm sorry, organs are just too churchy. I know. I wanted to be recognized by conservative and Orthodox congregations as well. I was raised Orthodox. Of course. His parents were super frum. Sent him to yeshiva and everything, Dave added. I gave Dave a quelling glance and added, "Unfortunately, they're no longer with us." "I'm sorry to hear that," Rabbi Kaplan said. "May their memory be a blessing." There was a pause, and then he added, "We'd love to see you in our services." I have an unusual sun sensitivity that makes me not want to leave the house during the day. "Oh, is that why you're not the one taking the baby in? Not wanting to take forever scrubbing off the sunscreen only to put it back on?" Rabbi Kaplan smiled at me, his expression sympathetic. I'd actually done it out of respect for the mikveh itself, but I nodded. I didn't know if I counted as dead or not, but if a corpse got into the mikveh somehow, it would have to be drained and refilled. It didn't matter whether they knew or not. I would know. Of course, the dead are released from all obligations as well. Was I dead or undead? How did that affect halakha? I wished that I had gone to ask Rabbi Mendel about it after all, back in 1841, as I had considered doing. I thought perhaps I should create a throwaway email address and ask a few rabbis. I wondered if they would assume I was a crank and ignore me. "Well," he said, "I wish you'd come for Passover last month. That was a night. Maybe in the fall, when the days get shorter, you can come see us on Friday nights. At the very least, I expect to see you for the High Holy Days. I mean, you're an Amud member." He meant I paid dues at a higher rate to support the synagogue. We'll see. I wanted to attend high holiday services badly, but was still concerned about whether all the Kohanim would have to leave because I was arguably dead. The Kohanim bless the congregation, so I could deny my entire community blessing. Would my very presence nullify the blessing? Yes, I'd adopted Ludwig's definitions of vampires and rejected the idea that I might be an alaka. Although if I were, I would definitely not be dead. That said, Ludwig had chuckled when I asked if we could shapeshift. "Also, I assume your wife is secure in her particular tradition, but please make sure she knows she's welcome to study with me and join the tribe as well if she likes. No pressure, of course." I smiled. That was, without a doubt, the loveliest reaction I'd ever received to my mixed marriage. "I will. Thank you." Destiny came out wearing a bathing suit with the baby wrapped in a towel, followed by the mikveh lady in her lovely tickle. The mikveh itself is a small pool with enough water to cover the entire body. There are 7 steps down into the water, and most modern mikvot are lovely. This one was no exception, all blue and cream sandstone-like tile. It looked like a luxurious spa. We'd been told that this water was clean and purified and warm, and on the other side of the wall was natural rainwater, and when someone went into the waters would kiss, which fulfilled the commandment that the mikveh be natural water. It was slightly over jacuzzi-sized across, but 5 feet deep. It smelled fresh, unchlorinated. Dave stood up and turned his back to give Miriam privacy. If she were older, we would have waited outside and relied upon the mikveh lady to say things were kosher. Destiny took Miriam out of the towel and walked down into the water with the naked baby. The waters came up to her shoulders. She smiled at me. "This is nice." She bounced Miriam in the water. "Hold her out away from you," Rabbi Kaplan said. "In order to be kosher, nothing can touch her but the water." Destiny appeared uncertain, but held Miriam out at arm's length. "All right," Rabbi Kaplan said. "In my experience, they cry. There's a moment of surprise, and then they cry. Blow in her face first, and then let go." Destiny winced. The rabbi smiled, a gentle smile. Isn't that the hardest thing for any parent? Letting go? Destiny glanced over at me, and I nodded. She blew into Miriam's face and let go. I felt a moment of panic. Oh no, what if we lost Miriam in this tiny space? But surely it was safe. They wouldn't allow this if it weren't. Miriam scrunched up her face before disappearing under the water, and I made the blessing for her. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech ha'olam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu al hatafila. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us concerning the immersion. Kosher! Rabbi Kaplan said, and Destiny caught the baby and pulled her close. Miriam cried, as expected, but mostly seemed startled. And then we all sang Siman Tav U'Mazel Tov to her, the song for weddings, conversions, and other joyful events. Destiny kissed Miriam on the cheek, and she quieted. My baby was a Jew, and I was so grateful to Destiny for being so generous as to do this with me. When Destiny brought the baby out, I kissed her on her tiny head and Destiny on her cheek. It wasn't Sukkot, sometimes called Zman Simkateno, but it was very much the season of our joy, the literal translation of Zman Simjetainu. Abraham, Atlantic Highlands, New Jersey, August 2nd, 2021. The knock on our front door came around 3 p.m. on a hot August Sunday. Destiny got up and carried Miriam on her hip to the door. I craned my head around the hall to see who it was. It was, alas, 2 Atlantic Highlands policemen, idiot husband and long-suffering wife. One policeman stood a little in front, and the other stood behind, writing things down in a little notebook. The man in front was bigger and darker, dark hair, terracotta suntan, and had a colossal mustache, while the other one in the back was thin and pale and fair-haired. It had been about 9 months since we'd seen them last. Had idiot husband really spent all that time agitating for something terrible to happen to Ivan? "Can I help you?" Destiny asked. I was already picking up a copy of the restraining order and Ludwig's business card. "May we come in?" the officer asked. Behind him, long-suffering wife rolled her eyes almost audibly. I walked over to stand behind Destiny, paperwork in hand. "I have a restraining order requiring Frank here to keep 100 feet from us at all times," I said, handing the paperwork to the officer. "My attorney's card. Do you mind if I call him?" "Hopefully that won't be necessary," the officer said. "Sir, ma'am, do you have a rabid pet?" "No," Destiny said. "I'm a veterinarian, by the way. My cats are both fully vaccinated. Do you need to see my vaccination records? I have them here in the house." "My dog was fine until he bit her cat," idiot husband said. "Rabies spreads via saliva," Destiny said. "His dog bit my cat. My cat didn't bite his dog." She turned to idiot husband and said, "I'm so sorry about your dog." "His dog attacked my cat," I emphasized. "This is harassment." "Have you tested your cat?" the other officer said. "The only test for rabies involves decapitating the pet, so no. But I can provide my proof of vaccination, and he's shown no rabies symptoms. If he were sick, he would have manifested symptoms in the first 30 days, usually more like a week." Destiny paused, then added, "It's standard practice to quarantine them for 30 days, watch for symptoms, and conclude that they're uninfected if they show no symptoms during that time." "Their cat isn't rabid," long-suffering wife said in a long-suffering monotone. The one who did most of the talking asked, "May I see him?" I didn't like where this was going, but Destiny called, "Ivan!" Ivan trotted into the room on his silent little cat feet. The talkative officer walked over and offered Ivan his hand. Ivan sniffed it, then gazed up at the man, expectant, awaiting petting. The officer grabbed Ivan by the scruff. "No!" Destiny said, rushing forward. "What are you doing? Stop!" I was bracing myself to grab my cat away and leave town after because an altercation with the police would attract Thomas's attention. I needed to either talk him down or act so quickly that things didn't have time to escalate, because if they did, my wife and baby might be harmed. I had a quick, visceral mental flash of Miriam Sr., little Shayna, and the single bullet. I walked towards the officer, both hands up, trying not to appear threatening. "My cat is fine. Please, put him down." Inanna swaggered towards the officer and growled, a threatening, large dog-worthy sound. The officer glanced down at her, uncertain, then looked back at idiot husband as if he was wondering if he had the wrong cat. Inanna stared up at the officer and growled again. There was the slightest shift in her weight in her hindquarters, like she was thinking about leaping. Ivan was doing what cats do when you scruff them and was holding still, but his eyes were preternaturally intelligent and calculating. There were clattering claws down the hall, and Freddie burst into the room and launched himself at the officer, who dropped Ivan in surprise. Ivan raced out of the room, a golden blur, and vanished. Freddie did a little dance on his hind legs at the officer as if the body slam was friendliness. Inanna washed one of her paws, appearing decidedly smug. "Freddie?" Frank, the idiot husband, had fallen to his knees on our Persian carpet and was staring at the dog. Freddie stared back at his former owner with huge, sad eyes. Oh, crap. People no longer believed in vampirism. Were we about to be the proof for the modern era? That would absolutely attract Thomas's attention. "Sir, I thought you said you put your dog down." "I did," he breathed. "I was there. The vet declared him dead. This dog showed up on our doorstep, and we have sucker written on the outside of our house in both cat and dog," I said. I intentionally kept my voice light and casual, and besides, it was the truth, just not the whole truth. The officers stared at each other, looked at Frank, and looked at us. "Was your dog put to sleep at her clinic?" the quiet officer asked. "No." "Is your dog microchipped?" the first officer asked. "No." And then Frank did the unthinkable and cried. "So you can't prove this is your dog?" "No," he sobbed. Clara, the long-suffering wife, stared at Freddie. "He looks exactly like our Freddie, but our Freddie is dead, so it can't be him." I grabbed a box of tissues and handed it to Frank in silent sympathy. The officers stared at each other again. The one with the restraining order placed it on the coffee table. "We're sorry to bother you, Mr. and Mrs. Levy. Mr. and Mrs. Crenshaw, it's time for us to go." Destiny and I glanced at each other, and she handed Miriam to me and kneeled in front of Frank. "Do you need a glass of water first?" Frank shook his head. He stood shakily with Destiny's help and walked towards the door. The man stared at the dog again. "He looks exactly like Freddie." Clara let out a long breath and blinked, like she was holding back tears. And then they all left. I went searching for Ivan. I knew he was in his favorite basement hiding spot behind the coffin, and petted him and apologized for the mean man grabbing him. Ivan let me pick him up and carry him upstairs and give him a treat of chicken liver puree, which he graciously shared with Freddie. "Should we give him back his dog?" Destiny asked. "We can't," I frowned. "We'd have to explain his new dietary needs and that he can't go out, but that's okay because he doesn't need to, and—" Destiny looked like she didn't see a problem and was mildly exasperated with the explanation. I supposed it must have sounded like normal discharge instructions for her. "We can't tell them about Freddie's condition without telling them about mine." Destiny did a one-armed shrug around the baby. "You have a medical condition. So does Freddie." It was naive of her to think she could trust idiot husband and his wife with that kind of information, but I loved her for it. The answer was still no. "Last time I told someone about my condition, they contacted mental health professionals on my behalf. I left town and changed my name." Destiny sighed. "It sounds like you do that a lot. I bit back a bitchier reply as unfair and settled for, "Yes, there's a dangerous bigot out there that I don't want to find me, so sometimes I have to move." Destiny nibbled her lip and stared at the floor. Then she said, "I still don't want to move. We'd have to bring Miriam's brother with us, and my mother's. That said, you'd let me know if it was too dangerous to stay, right?" It was my turn to shrug. Assuming I accurately judged the danger, yes. Thomas was, I was reasonably certain, after me specifically because I was a Jewish vampire. Miriam was Jewish, but not a vampire. Destiny was neither. Destiny eyed Freddy. "Do we need to dye the dog?" I burst out laughing. "I think the damage is done." I gave Freddy a comforting hug, but wasn't sure whether I was comforting him or me.
You've been listening to the Immortal Gifts Podcast, and I'm your host and author, Catherine Villiard. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what happened next, and please rate the podcast to help other people find it. See you next time, and remember, becoming a vampire is a thing that can just happen to you, but being a monster is a choice.